G'day and welcome to Aussie Mike's Bees for another update on the Varroa outbreak in New South Wales, Australia. Now it's been about 3 weeks since the last update I gave you. The good news is there's been no further outbreaks outside the existing red zones that were present back at that update I did on the 4th of July. So that is good news. There's been more discoveries within those zones. So they've got the red zones, the purple zones and the yellow zones, and up until now, or just this last week, all they've been concentrating on is identifying any colonies that have Varroa. And at this stage they're satisfied now that they've actually fenced off the areas and preventing them spreading. And now they're beginning the eradication program. Now, how are they doing that? Well, combination of the same method you use for AFB outbreaks. So a cup full of, seal the hive up, tip a cup full of petrol or gasoline into the hive, seal it up. That kills everything instantly, the bees and the Varroa. Then they seal it up either to be burned on site or relocated by the authorities. Now, just to warn people, no, this does not mean that you eradicate your hive and burn it. That's actually against the order. You've got to be leaving it entirely up to the authorities to do the eradication. So don't do anything on your own if you're in any of those zones. And even if you're outside the zones, you're not allowed to interfere with your hive. Now, they've loosened up some of the controls so you can feed your hives, and I mentioned that last time. Do inspections for Varroa, of course, and report. That's unchanged. But some of the other easing up of controls is they're now extending an opportunity for commercial beekeepers, in particular the pollination beekeepers, to relocate their hives to, in particular, the almond fields and similar. Now we'll cover that in the document. So we'll just go on screen now and go through the latest update from the government, and we'll take it point by point there. Now we're back over to the Department of Primary Industries, the DPI website, and the big declaration you can see highlighted in the centre of the screen here now is Hive Movement Declaration open for registered commercial beekeepers. So registered beekeepers can now submit a hive movement declaration to move their honeybees and hives to low risk areas of the state. Now they've done a risk assessment to work out that who can safely move their hives to where, so that they're eliminating any risk of further spread. So there is more to read here, and there's quite a bit of detail. Now, I'm not going to go through every point here, but for these commercial guys, they have to have completed, I'll highlight that again, not going to work, down the bottom there, completed a Tocal College Varroa Mite online training. Now, if you don't know, Tocal College is where the Certificate 3 beekeeping course is run in Australia. That's Australia's trade program for beekeepers. So you've got to do that online training, and you've got to have complied with the alcohol wash requirements and complete a hive movement declaration. And it'll only be allowed to move them in the blue zone. That's the greater part of New South Wales. Now, incidentally, the equivalent departments in our states outside New South Wales, so there's Victoria to the south, South Australia to the west, and Queensland to the north, they've all banned New South Wales bees and bee products crossing the border. Now, under normal conditions, there's bees going to and from different states, And the requirement already is in place that the beekeeper that's moving their hives have to get a permit from the state that their hives are currently in, and also a permit from the state that they're moving their hives to. And if they're going through any states on the way, they also have to get a permit from them. So there's already good controls in place. Now, if these guys cross the border with a truckload of bees and they don't have those permits, they're in a world of hurt. It's just our biosecurity laws are very strict, and that $1.1 million fine that I talked about in the last update applies to them under those circumstances. So we'll just keep going. So they're not permitted to move hives that are in an eradication zone, the red zone, a surveillance zone and a notification zone. So it's the red, purple and blue areas. So the greater part of New South Wales, they can move it. Now, we have almond fields in New South Wales. There's almond fields in Victoria. So this is saying New South Wales bees can go to the New South Wales almond fields and any other pollination crops there are that require it. Now, we're late in winter now, so those crops will be needing pollination in the coming few weeks. But they cannot cross the border, and that's the safe bet. So they're also saying anything up at that Narrabri emergency zone can't be moved either. And well, that's the same thing. It's a red zone. So what this the movement of hives that were in Narrabri zones before the 30th of April, so before any known outbreak in Narrabri, they can move once the hive movement declaration has been completed. So they're getting right down to the nitty-gritty of who can and who cannot move their hives. So I think they've done a good risk assessment, and I won't go into the detail too much. You know, some of the requirements are that they've done alcohol washes. If you've got less than 640 hives, you've got to have tested 64 hives. If you've got 640 or more, then 10%. They want loads of testing, and fair enough. So there's rules about when they're travelling and so on. That doesn't apply to most of us, but I think they're being pretty tight on controls about who moves their hives and for what reason. And there's a whole bunch of questions down here. What's required? Can you use a sugar shake? Probably not. Let's see. That would be an interesting one. They're saying alcohol wash has been determined as more effective. This has been borne out by a lot of people overseas who've had a lot of experience. Randy Oliver comes to mind. He's pretty much dismissed alcohol washes as just not reliable enough. Now, a point to that, in Australia, we've been doing testing for Varroa for some years now, and the recommended method was sugar shake. Why was that? Well, we only need to find one, and we know we've got a problem. So sugar shake, it'll find one. And also, particularly in the amateur beekeeping world, some people are reluctant to kill 300 bees to do an alcohol wash. But now, if you're really genuinely checking for Varroa, alcohol wash is the way to go. And to put it in perspective, what's the daily mortality rate of a beehive anyway? 1,000, 1,500 bees dying every day just of normal attrition. Old age, predation, and perhaps disease. So that's a normal number. So 300 out of 1,000, 300 out of 1,500, not a lot. And if you think of it in terms of doing a blood test, like a bee colony is a macroorganism. So the whole colony is the organism you're talking about, and each bee is like a cell within the macroorganism. And that's equivalent to you as an individual human being is a macroorganism, and your blood cells are like the individual bees. So when you draw blood for testing, those blood cells are going to die. But the results you find from the testing could well give you the information you need to get over an ailment, a disease. And it's the same with checking Varroa. For the sake of 300 bees, you could know what you've got to do to eliminate that Varroa problem, or at least control it, as in the rest of the world that's had Varroa for some time. So enough of that preaching. Let's get on with in the rest of this check. So there's lots of questions, so I'll leave that to those commercial guys to deal with. I'm just bringing you an update here. So let's get back to the main page here. So that's the frequently asked questions, alcohol wash, sugar shake, and your well-being. So I wanted to get down to the latest updates. So Saturday, the 23rd of July. It's currently my time, the 24th, the day after this. So it's the latest. And as I said before, no new outbreaks outside of the red zones that were already in place. So it's looking very much like they've managed to contain it. And although there's been a few negative comments in my previous videos from people saying it's a lost cause, it's out of control, the government's to blame, look, I understand all of those comments. I understand where you're coming from. One of the questions was, why weren't there more sentinel hives? Or why aren't there more sentinel hives? To my knowledge, at least in New South Wales, now I know the DPI people up there because I got to know them doing my Certificate 3 in beekeeping. To my knowledge, there are sentinel hives in every port of New South Wales, and not just the ocean ports, but also inland airports that had international travel. And there's still only a handful of people that can check these, so there are weeks in between each check. It's unrealistic to expect these guys to be testing every week. It just can't happen. But it was something like 6 weeks between checking and the discovery of the new Newcastle outbreak. Anyway, so I welcome all the more comments. Keep it friendly, but more comments, great. The more we share our concerns and knowledge, the happier I am. I've had great comments from people overseas with a lot of experience in Varroa, treatment-free and treatment, pro-treatment. So keep it coming. So back to this Saturday the 23rd. So they're saying a permit required for those guys moving hives in those zones that they're allowed to. That's great. Registered beekeepers must not transit through the eradication zones or the emergency zones or the surveillance zones. That makes sense. That's all three of those: red, purple, yellow. Hives and honeybees have been in the eradication zone in the last 24 months or in Narrabri emergency zone since 30th of April are not permitted to be moved. Makes sense. So a copy of the group emergency permit must be carried with beekeepers who are moving their hives. Alright, looks like maybe Queensland is allowing some transition, or maybe from Queensland to New South Wales. So that's a that's a pollinator field. So for more information on biosecurity group emergency permit, movement Queensland transit. Okay, that's what it's looking like. I'll just have a quick look. That's just on the 21st of July. That was a previous update to yesterday's. Infested premises count remains at 40 as of last night, with no new detections for some days now. So I think we're looking good. That's more on the movement. And going back to, that's more on allowed. So I think that's enough of an update. I'll get over to the map to show you what we have there. So here's the current map. It doesn't look a lot different to previously, and that's the good thing. You notice in the red zones there are, up here at Narrabri, nothing's changed. That's great. And it looks like the red zones have spread a little bit, but only within the area already there. Like this is down at my area. I'm right on the edge of that, just outside that yellow zone. And these two were here weeks ago, with this one a new one since. Most of them are still around Newcastle. These two look like new ones since the last time I looked, but they're still containing within this yellow zone. Zoom back out. So essentially we're still keeping it to that central New South Wales coastline area and Narrabri, and it hasn't spread outside there. Talking to the DPI people, they are still very confident that they're going to knock this on the head. Now, some good news is the government has announced that they will be compensating commercial beekeepers for the loss of their hives and equipment in full. That's great news. Now, the amateur side is a little different, but we have the Amateur Beekeepers Australia, and the president of ABA is Sheila Stokes. She is a part of the organisation dealing with this outbreak, and she's representing the amateur beekeepers to look after our interests as well. And so there is a lot of negotiating going on, and she's brilliant at that, to compensate amateur beekeepers for their loss as well. It hasn't been settled what level of compensation will be, but there is compensation coming for registered beekeepers. So if you're one of those unregistered beekeepers and you lose your hives through this, you won't be getting compensated, but also you could face that $1.1 million fine. Boy, oh boy. Now, get registered. There's no backlash. Report the location of your hive, register with a DPI. They're not going to get you for not previously being registered. That's not their motivation here. Their motivation is to get this Varroa outbreak eradicated, under control. So I understand you wanting to be self-sufficient and not having anything to do with Big Brother government breathing down your neck. Completely understand that. I feel the same way. I think small government's good, minimal invasion in what I do, as long as I don't affect other people. And that's the key thing here. If you've got Varroa in your bees and you haven't registered and looked after your bees enough to keep these diseases under control, then you're affecting other people in a big way. So I would urge you, please register. So I think that's it for our update of what's going on. Now let me take you to another article by that associate professor from Adelaide that I commented in the last update. He's got another article out there, so I'm just going to have a bit of a poke at that too. I've just gone back over to this article that I showed you last time. Hear me out, using Varroa mite to control. Anyway, I just wanted to skip down here just to highlight one of the techniques this guy uses to sensationalise, and he's given a link. Read more. Pest plants and animals cost Australia around $25 billion a year, and it will get worse. Oh yeah, that's very bad. Now this is in an article about the Varroa hitting Australia and what a problem honeybees, feral honeybees in particular, Now remember, he wants to introduce Varroa mite into the feral bee colonies to wipe them out. And so he's got this link in here. We'll go there. Pest, plants and animals cost Australia 25, and it will get worse. So we click on that and we've got a cane toad. Now that was an introduced species to control pests in sugarcane, and now the cane toad is a big issue. It's a problem. It does eat native species. Snakes would eat them, and because they're poisonous they would kill the snake. So although the snakes adapted by getting smaller so that they weren't big enough to take on a cane toad. Alright, shamefully, we love that language. Australia has one of the highest extinction rates in the world. And we go on to talk about various pests. Now, some of these I completely agree with. Feral cats, they're hideous and they contribute nothing. And we've got this chart down here with time going on and all of these introduced. So we've got a cat and a fox and fire ants, worst of the worst. Okay, again, and here we are. Cats at number 1. I'm all for it. Get out there with the sharpshooters and just keep shooting them. Rabbits, same, although they're good eating. At least you can eat rabbits or make pet food. I've got a mate that does that. Fire ants, I don't know how they got here. They're absolutely no use to anyone. Pigs, that can be food. Foxes and ragwort and weeds. Now, so this article came from, this was a link from an article about how bad honeybees are, and nowhere in here are European honeybees listed as a problem. Nowhere. The whole article is on the real pests, and all of those pests don't contribute anything, with the possible exception, they've got buffalo there, so some of them can be good food if we hunt them. One of the other things that came up were horses in the Kosciuszko, wild horses. They're useless too. They contribute nothing and do a lot of damage. So, yep, get rid of them. But I can't agree with the idea, especially with this. This article, putting a link to this article is just dishonest in my view. I can't see. We're never going to get rid of honeybees, and honeybees, Apis mellifera, contribute. They produce food and help us produce food through pollination and other things. So I'm biased. I'm a beekeeper. I'm not a scientist. But really, what's his name again? Patrick O'Connor. I can only think that you're after research money if you push your own bent, and that you're a lefty, anti-human, like greenies, anti-human. Good luck to you, bud. Bees are here for keeps. I'm going to wind up there. I've had my little rant. If you've got something to say about this, either pro-Patrick or otherwise, leave your comments below. I read and reply, or at least attempt to reply to every comment. Some commenters have put in 1-word or 2-word comments and they haven't made much sense. Try to be kind and give us some context and spread it out so we've got something to chew on there. I appreciate every comment that comes. This is Mike from Aussie Mike's Bees. Thanks for watching once again on the second update to the Varroa mite incursion in New South Wales, Australia 2022. Cheers.